Hello, good morning. I, Khyati Saini, Assistant Professor, welcome you on behalf of Central for Distance and Online Education, VGU Jaipur. We are virtually gathered here for an industry expert talk on the world of API and introduction to API. Learners, you will receive a certificate of participation, and for this, you should be present during the session. And at the end of the session, you will get a feedback form. It is compulsory for you all to fill the feedback form as it will be helpful for us to fetch your details for participation certificate. You will be hearing presentation from Mr. Vikram Singh, Web Solutions Engineering in full stack at Google, with over 10 plus years of experience in web technologies. I show my gratitude to Mr. Vikram Singh for accepting our request to address our learners virtually. Mr. Singh is an esteemed professional. He has experience in both front-end and back-end development, cloud technologies, and more. Mr. Singh has done Bachelor of Engineering in Information Science from CMR Institute of Technology, Bangalore. He is also passionate about product development and has experience of running his own ride-hauling SaaS product. Now, moving to our session today, Mr. Vikram will share his insights on API, offering us a unique perspective on the world of API. Let us give a warm virtual welcome to Mr. Vikram Singh. Welcome you, sir, to our virtual stage.
Thank you, Kathy, for the introduction. And very good morning to all the learners who have joined virtually. Okay. So are we good to get started?
Yeah.
Sure. So my introduction is provided by Kathy that summarizes what my experiences are. And today I have chosen to speak about a topic which is pretty famous. And I'm sure like people, especially who are having some sort of computer science background, would have already come across the term APIs. So what I'm going to try to cover in this session are the two aspects that would cater to people who are from the computer science background, as well as people who do not have like a specific computer science background, but some or the other way the topic is going to be interesting and helpful for others as well. Okay, let me start with the presentation. Let me know if you are able to see this slide that covers the topic.
Yes, it is visible.
All right. Okay. So roughly, can people like post in chat about how many of them have computer science background and how many are from non-computer science background? Okay. So we have like one moment. Yeah. Sorry for the interruption. Let's begin. Okay, so we have fairly mixed crowd, people who are from the non-CS background and people who have the CS background. So the key takeaways from this session, that's why is like focusing on the both aspects like the business side of it, or the general uh, value offering by the APIs, which is useful for anybody in general, whoever in the industry today is not untouched from the computer science or the technology world, because technology is the key enabler. And as you might see, like even the restaurant business, they today operate in a world where people like or businesses like Zomato and Swiggy are actually one of the key business providers to them. So some or the other way, they also have to be aware of what's happening in the technology world. That's why even the session's name is about the world of APIs, because today's world in general is powered by APIs and the tech. The two aspects that we are and then what is the importance to the businesses, how businesses are leveraging APIs to drive their digital transformation these days. You might have seen that back a few decades, it was very often that you had to visit the bank for some or the other work. That is one traditional example that we all are aware of these days. Digital transformation has primarily reshaped how the banking works, not just in India and the entire uh, world altogether. I see someone has raised a hand. Is there a question? Okay. So, and we all might have seen that now we all have like net banking enabled banking services, and everything is pretty much online these days. So that is is what digital transformation means, primarily the way how businesses are operating these days and how they are delivering value to their own customers. So we are going to focus on that aspect as well, and as well as on the technology front of it, like how do we develop APIs and what does it mean. So if you have ever written a code, like even if a smallest program that you have written, the chances are that you have already consumed some or the other APIs. We all might be familiar with the term. What API stands for is Application Programming Interface, and we are going to discuss what does particularly an interface means over here. And uh, what you see here is technically almost everything consumes API these days, like even your CLI, your command line interfaces, where you kind of run your programs and all. Uh, you use your laptop to browse the web, even your speakers, light bulbs, and phones, etc. They all, some or the other way, are connected through each other using the APIs. Have you ever made a payment using UPI app? I think most of us would have. Um, it would also be safe that almost everyone in this meeting would have used the UPI. How does UPI work, and how is like multiple vendors like Phone Pay or Google Pay, be it like any other bank, has the same functionality, uh, and everyone is able to build these apps together? So um, you might have also used the smart bulbs these days in your home. Like a lot of companies are offering these smartphones where you can like either change the color of this bulb or turn on and off with either voice commands connected to your Alexas or your Google Home devices, or you can even talk to your smartphone and then just say that turn on the bulb or turn on the light, even in the local languages. So how does all that work? Yes, internally everything all of these devices, they are powered by APIs. Ever wondered how the Google Maps are being served and how all the applications like Uber, Ola, or Zomato, they are able to use the Google Maps inside their own applications? The answer is again, they are being offered through some of the other APIs. Also, we might have seen that how many a times in our news feeds we come across like this famous person or this celebrity has tweeted something on this platform X, previously called Twitter, and then we open up that web page and then we see that there's a small snippet of Twitter which shows the live feed. Like, although they could have copy pasted their feed, Twitter and then just shown it over there, but it does not provide that authenticity. Like, but once you see the proper Twitter gadget or the X gadget over there, you feel like this is the authentic information. Yes, this is what really that person tweeted. So how does that come into the multiple web pages? I'm sure many of us here would not be using Twitter directly, but Twitter is so famous through other news channels that some or the other way we come across that, hey, this person posted something about this topic. And then we open the web page and we see their tweets. How does the payment received sound box works? Once you make a UPI payment, you see there's a sound box which each and every vendor, and then the sound box plays the notification about the payment receipt. So even, yes, that which looks like a fairly dumb device, but it has enormous amount of capabilities powered through the APIs only. Now, what are the different type of APIs? Before I begin and explain about the type of APIs, I must say that since the topic is very common about APIs, there are like tons of content where people go and explain and people start with the full form of what APIs stand for. But it is very hard to get the simple concepts very clearly at times. And that is what happens initially when you have a superficial knowledge about what APIs are. Sometimes what we just think is that API means something that is working on the web. But API is a general term which means that you're defining a way of communication between two systems. And then you have something that actually implements that functionality. Okay. And there are two different types of APIs primarily, or I would say the implementation styles. So languages have their own APIs, like Java has its own API, Node.js has its own APIs, Web has its own APIs, or when I say browsers have their APIs, there is certain functionality of the browsers, like how the back button on the browser works, that is exposed via API, browser's API, and web has its own API. That means like whatever you serve from a server, how it is supposed to be handled and rendered by the browsers, those are governed by the web APIs. Then operating system has its own APIs. So you might have generally seen these days, there is a dark theme and the lighter theme on your operating system. And then rest of the other applications, they also turn themselves into the similar theme. Once your system theme is set to dark, other applications also turn themselves into a dark theme if they support that. So how does that happen? How do they know about what is the state of operating system? So operating systems also expose some APIs which these applications can consume to determine what is the current theme of the system. And then there are remote APIs, which are the more popular ones. And when we say about APIs, this is what generally comes into our mind. And here also I've listed three most popular ones which are used in the industry, and REST is the most significant one, or the most famous one, I must say. 90% of the web applications that you see today are running some or the other form of RESTful APIs. Yes, gRPC is also gaining a lot of traction these days, and SOAP is kind of more traditional, and I don't think a lot of new applications are being developed on the SOAP these days. For this session today, we will going to focus mostly on the REST, and we will not talk much about gRPC and the SOAP. Also, let me just show you quickly when I say what Java APIs mean or what Node.js API means, how their documentation looks like, what Web API means. Okay. So are you able to see the Oracle documentation for the Java? You should be able to see on my screen that
Yeah.
the web page. That
Yes,
okay.
yes.
Sure. Okay. So if I come on this documentation page, it says these are the API specifications for version 21. Okay. Now, what is important here is the specification part. What does it mean? We are going to discuss in detail what API specification mean, because this is the key aspect to understand what APIs are. Okay. I'm not going to go in detail and describe any of these, but the whole point of bringing you to this web page is like, okay, yes, the Java itself has some APIs, and these are not the remote APIs. So if you are developing a program in Java, you might be using some of these internally. Let's say this is one famous one that is one of the HTTP client, okay, and WebSocket APIs. So if you, let's say tomorrow you are building some application in Java, which is going to call a remote service, then probably you are going to use this package, and you are going to use functions provided by this HTTP package in the Java. This is what we are calling, what are the APIs exposed by javanet.http, and you can come to this page and see what are the documentation and use accordingly. Okay. So in the same way, there is a documentation for rest of the other languages also. Like when I was talking about the Node.js APIs and the browsers have APIs. I'll show you also about the web APIs because this would be interesting. Let's say you are building a web application, then what are the important functionalities? As we see in Java, we saw a package java.net.http for making HTTP calls. A similar API is provided by the web also. Let's say this is the Fetch API, which is a newer version. Before that, there was XML HTTP that was used for making web calls. So this is the modern and safe way of making HTTP calls from the browser itself. So let's say if I am kind of I have opened the DevTools over here in this browser, and I am going to reload this page again. I'm not sure if the DevTools are visible. I think it should be. Okay. So you see a lot of calls are going through here in this networks tab. So if I do this fetch/xhr, I'm not sure if it is visible. So if I do fetch/xhr, you see there is one fetch call. This is the same call which was made by the browser. I think this failed to load some data, but never mind. This is how you can see what are the calls, network calls being made to different APIs. And some of the all of these calls are being powered by some of the other web API that okay, I see a hand raised. Is there a question? You can take that up.
We'll take all the questions after your session. That would be the best thing.
Yeah, sure.
Learners, you can note down your questions or put them into the chat box. Vikramji will take all the questions at the end.
Okay. So, and then XML HTTP was another one. So this was the most basic one, and everything in the jQuery was built on top of like using XML HTTP request APIs. jQuery provided a simple way to make those HTTP calls, and then jQuery got a lot of popularity back in like near around 2007 and all. So if you are building a web application, this is probably a place where you should familiarize yourself. Let's say you are building something with the audio system, like you want to record audio, or let's say you are building something like what Zoom application is through the browsers. Then how do you send audio? Okay, so you come to this place, you see how the web audio API works, you read about it, and then you use it in your code. Okay. Now let's go back to our discussion for APIs. So we understood like what local APIs mean, like where your code and the API provider both are in the same system. Probably like you're writing a Java code and then you're using the package to make HTTP calls in the similar way. Let's say you are writing a Node.js application and you want to implement a functionality to read the barcodes, then you can use some APIs provided by the Node.js. We also saw what web APIs are and where the documentation is. Now let's talk about the remote APIs, REST API or the RESTful architecture. We are going to see in detail what REST means, but in general, the REST APIs are the ones which have like client and server, where one is a provider and other is a consumer. In remote APIs, there are two different machines involved, which could be geographically separated, or they could be in the same geography, but primarily they are two different machines. Now, understanding what API means, as I told, like specifications was one thing that we should pay attention to and understand what specifications actually mean. And then the second aspect is implementation. If you understand these two core concepts, then the understanding about API is complete. Okay. So before even understanding specifications and implementations, let's talk about interface, which is a very common general term. It's not a term which is related to the programming or coding. An interface is a very, very common term. Like it is used to describe a concept. When you say interface, what does it come to your mind? Can anybody just type a few things that what does it come to your mind when I talk about interface? You can put your responses in the chat. Yeah, pretty much what I was thinking about, user interface. Yes, correct. Link to MCS. Yeah, that is also absolutely right. Interlink with other software, a platform. Platform is a bigger thing, but yes, in a sense, you can say that it's a platform as well. Okay, I think those all answers are fairly correct. User interface is something that generally comes to our mind when we first talk about interface. Yes. Okay. Okay. How many of you think that AI is the next interface? Can we call artificial intelligence an interface? Okay. It's going to play a role. We might have heard about terms like brain-machine interfacing, right? So in those terms, AI is going to play a role where you can control a machine directly through brain, and there's an interface that would be more dynamic than what we are familiar with as of now in today's world. Okay, in today's world, most of the interfaces are strictly defined and static. But when machine learning and AI comes into the picture, then the interfaces are also going to take a different sort of shape. But yes, um, on a very elementary level, basic level, an interface is something where you just go and ask for something, and there is a specific way of asking for it, and you also expect that someone is going to respond you back in a very specific way. For an example, you go to a ticket counter, and the person sitting behind the ticket counter is expecting that you will tell them source and destination and the amount, the number of people traveling. So there's like a defined way of requesting for a service on the ticket counter, and you also expect that the person would actually accept some change from you or receive a request for a payment and then finally issue a ticket to you. So a ticketing counter is also an interface. Okay. Now coming to the specifications part. When I said like ticketing counter is an interface, and there is also a defined or an expected way of asking for request and receiving back something from there. In a similar way, there are specifications for the programs and machines to talk to each other. They are more strictly defined than what we humans do. Let's take an example of specifications and defining contracts and request response through an example of letters. Okay, like back in the days, we used to write letters. These days, nobody is writing letters, but um, since we all might have like some requirement, some or the other way to write an application, even in the digital form, maybe we are not using the postcards, but we still write the documents, or we write the applications in a document and then just print it out or send it out to the people. So back in the days, we had a postcard. Okay. And we had some format of writing, like where basically we will have something like to whom we are addressing it. And then there is like a subject lines where we describe what this is about, subject. And then this probably is not a big paragraph, right? Like this is expected to be a something that grabs the attention and then describes what this letter is all about. Then there is the main body of letter. Okay. This is where you write down all your major content. This is the body of this letter. And then in the end, you have your signature or the thank you note over here. Okay. And finally, on the back side of this postcard, there will be an address. And there used to be a stamp as well. Okay. So stamp sometimes used to determine okay, let's not get into like what stamps were used for, but it was some sort of authority or some sort of credibility added by that stamp on the postcard, and based on that, some services were either faster, slower, or they used to be segregated in some way. And in some cases, the postcards were of different color to signify different intentions of these letters. Now, how to write this letter has a format, right? Like you have you have subject, you have body, you have a thank you note, you have address. So we have have some specifications of writing a letter or communicating in a particular way, right? So this was one way of communicating, and we defined that this is how you should write so that other person also knows where is what, and it's easier to communicate. Okay. Now what we are doing in APIs is somewhat similar thing. We are defining contracts, and we are defining what the request is going to look like, and we are going to define our responses. Let me show you one specification. There is a generic format which is commonly used in the industry for defining these contracts and request response. This is called Open API specification format. I'm not sure if you guys are already familiar with it. In the chat, if you are familiar with it, can you write yes? And if you're not familiar, can you write no about it? Okay, screen is not visible. Some people are saying that.
Sir, is visible. So Agar, you have opened, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's open, sir.
Okay. Okay, so I see a lot of people are not familiar with the Open API specification. Some are saying the screen is frozen. Okay, for some it is working, then it means it might be an issue on the side where people are seeing the screen as frozen. They might try to like rejoin or something. Okay, so now it's working. Okay, fine. Let's continue with this one. So this is last screen was not shown, or maybe people were not able to see that postcard example. Open API specification. This is a way of defining the contracts that I was talking about. Okay. The contracts defined by like you have this in a text format. Basically, this is not a programming language. But yes, again, this is a YAML format. You can use either YAML or you can use the JSON. These are two data exchange formats. I'm not going to cover too much in detail what YAML and JSON are, but they are fairly like a text only. Let's try and understand what this specification means. There's a basic info about what the sample API is, what the title is, the description about it. Then servers, like where my application is deployed, what are the servers for it? If there are more than one server, then you can define multiple servers over here. Okay, this is the server which is like a production server, main server, and then there is a staging server. They've defined two URLs. So whoever wants to consume this API, they will know that if they want to consume this API on a production server, then this is the URL to use. If they want to use staging, then this is the URL that they can use. Then paths. We will discuss what paths mean and all later on. But let's just go with the flow that there is a user's service. And if you want to interact with the user service, you need to make a GET call. Okay. And then what it returns is a list of users. And there is a description that what it means, optional extended description. You can have like some sample or bigger thing over here going on, and how it will respond back to you. So the request part is fairly simple. You just make /users and say get to it, and then it will respond you back with 200, and it will have a JSON array of usernames. And it will be packaged inside a format which is of type application JSON, and it will be an array of type string. Okay, so this is where we have described the contract of request and response. Request contract doesn't have too much over here. It's just like you request for /users with the get method, and then this is what you should expect. In the happy scenario, if everything is fine, then this is what you will get, but you can describe your failure scenarios also. Okay. Going back to the slides, I hope the slide should be visible now. And then the implementation part. We saw what specifications are. Specifications are defined in a plain language agnostic way. You could actually write them on a paper and pen, and you can write it in a paragraph format. But for some standardization, for some sort of automation, there was a way introduced. Okay, let's agree that we will write how Swagger introduced it in an open API specification format. Still, there are two ways you can write it, either in YAML or you can write it in JSON. But they are fairly language agnostic. They don't depend on Java, C++, or any other programming language. Then the implementation part. Implementation is the writing code and deploying to the server. So let's say that /users service, we have defined that this is how you request, this is what it is going to respond, but who's there actually working for it? That piece of code, when you write and deploy, is called the implementation. So when we say what is an API, we are talking about two things. It's specifications and its implementation. Sometimes, let's say if you are the only developer working, or maybe like you are in a hurry and you're building your own startups, people might not write specifications directly and they just go on to the implementation part. But then what happens once your startup grows, or once your company becomes too big and you want to others also to use your APIs, then you will have to write some or the other way of documentation. Yeah, right now the screen is frozen because I'm on a slide. There's no activity happening, but are you guys seeing the understanding what API means slide or something else? Okay. Yeah, maybe it's some people who are facing this issue more. Okay. We will see about the implementation and code writing later on. Okay. A lot of people are facing, I'll just reshare it once again. Okay. Is it good for everyone? We are on the slide. Okay. Two important things that we need. Okay, this is the two important things that we need for our API implementation. Specifications we are done. We didn't need anything major than just a common way of writing specifications. Now, for implementation, two major things are like protocol and the data exchange format. Protocols, there are like the famous ones, HTTP, HTTP2, and WebSockets. Most of the web APIs are using HTTP. There are some APIs like gRPC that rely on HTTP2, and then there are some APIs that might be consuming WebSockets. Okay, the data exchange format are like JSON, XML, and protocol buffers. The most famous one, along with the RESTful APIs and HTTP, is the JSON data exchange format. And then XML also used, but a lot of people are like not using XML as much these days. Okay, protocol buffers is getting famous because of the lightweight nature, and it could transport the data much faster because it's shorter and it is in the binary format. So, okay. So protocol, you can think of something that does the job of transportation. If you see like the trucks over there, they are the ones which does the transportation, and the protocol is responsible for doing this sort of transformation. Data exchange format is like the containers which are there on this okay. Data exchange formats are like the containers where you actually have your stuff inside. So JSON and XML are the formats where you write your actual data. Okay. So that is what these two pictures signify. One is the transportation layer. One is the data exchange format. Okay. Now let's do something with the generative AI, and we will see the specifications and implementation part of the APIs. Also, these days it would be like very common to use AI or Gen AI going forward, and it is going to speed up your work wherever you go. You either like you are developing APIs, consuming APIs, or just want to work in any other role surrounding the API ecosystem. Okay. Okay, you guys should be able to see the chat, Gemini chat window. Okay, cool. So what I'm going to do over here is just write a request prompt for, let's take an example of order management API for a restaurant. Okay. Okay, so not only it is writing these specifications, but it is also generating the description for each of the fields. Okay, so this is what we saw the OpenAPI YAML specifications. Now this has generated a file which describes that, okay, the title of my API is restaurant order management API. Then there is a server which is going to serve this application, and then there is a get orders API. And what it does is it retrieves a list of orders, and it has described the schema also. I didn't have to give it like anything at all, but it came up with a fairly decent example for an order management API. Okay, now it is also describing what happens when you supply invalid parameters. There will be an internal server error, and what the responses are going to be. It is describing that over here, and it's a long specification. But as you see, like this is one way of generating your specifications. If you have your schema, then you can supply the schema directly to the Gen AI tools, and it will write the specifications for you. Now we can also say that let's take one particular service over here. Let's say there is a get orders, and then there is a post for create new order. API. Okay, let's say that we ask it to create a new implementation for the create new order API. So this has also now generated a code which would be running on the server side. You see, like it has imported up some package. Let's not go in details on that, but what it is trying to do is it's trying to take order in the format which is specified by our OpenAPI specifications. And then it is going to write back what is our response. The response is 201, which means the order has been accepted, and it is generating a new order and returning back to the client. And then there is like, in case if it fails, then it will return 500, and it will also write back that internal server error has occurred. And it generated some other description on what and why it is writing this code. Now, let's say I have to deploy this application on Cloud Run, then you can also take GenAI's help to generate the steps or provide you the steps to deploy. So this has given a long description, which in practicality is a few lines of code and one CLI command, and then the entire code will go to some server in the cloud, and then you will be able to run this API. We're not going to do that right away because it is going to take some time and we'll not be able to cover other topics then. Okay, so we saw some glimpse into what Gen AI is able to do with the APIs and how it can speed up the entire process. Now let's talk about what exactly REST is, which is one of the most popular style of implementing APIs. RESTful architecture is a resource-oriented architecture, which means you always request for a resource. Like here, the order was a resource in our example. It has to be stateless, which means like your current call need not know anything about the previous calls. All the calls are agnostic of each other, and it's not like a session oriented how the traditional login systems are. And most often the state is preserved in the client itself. Server doesn't know anything about what the client state is. Let's say if somebody has added something in the cart, then it is not necessary for server to know. It should reside in the client side only, and then send that information to the server. This works on HTTP or HTTPS, and it primarily uses JSON as the data exchange format. It can also work with XML though. And this is how generally the format is. Like this is what we saw in our server field description in the specifications. We have the host name, we have a version, we have collection, and we have the entity. Now, what is exactly REST architecture? The architecture is governed by these 5+1 constraints, where 5 constraints are mandatory to follow, and the 6th one is optional constraint. So any API that you implement is supposed to adhere to these constraints to be able to call it a RESTful architecture. Uniform interface, which means once you have defined your specifications or your contracts, then you don't change them, because somebody might be already using it, and if you change them, then you might end up breaking those clients. Okay, So that is why whenever you are having some sort of changes, let's say you come up with a way which is more efficient of placing an order. Let's say earlier you had to tell about the complete list of items that you want to order, and now you can order it with just some code, which is a combination, or you come up with the combos to order instead of like individual items. Then what you do is you implement a second interface, which is your version 2, but your version 1 still remains and you don't break your existing clients. You can deprecate version 1 with like some time period, or like giving some prior notifications to the consumers of your API. And then it has to be a client server architecture. There needs to be two different entities to operate on your API that you are implementing. One has to be the client and other has to be the server. They both either can be on the same machine or different machine, but these are two different entities. Stateless server need not know anything about the state of the client. In most cases, like even for authentication, server does not know that this client is currently logged in or logged out, because there is no concept of maintaining sessions on the server. However, there is a way of authenticating every time. Whenever a client makes a request, they send out a authorization or authentication token, which is validated. And based on that, server will proceed or block the request. But it doesn't maintain a list of clients who are currently using the application or who are logged in or logged out. Cacheable. So your APIs should be cacheable for the performance benefits. Like you should be able to store the responses of your APIs in some intermediary layer, and sometimes it might be possible that client receives the response faster without even reaching to the server. So it has to be cacheable. Layered system. Then this guideline is like both cacheable and layered systems are like guidelines. It says that it should be cacheable. Okay, it does not mean that you should always have a cache implemented, but if someone wants to cache, then it should be cacheable. Layered system also says that it should work even if a new layer is introduced in between your APIs. Each system should communicate with the system above and below it, and client should still be able to make the calls without knowing much about like what the intermediary layers are. And the sixth constraint is code on demand, which is optional, where your API itself can send some code to run for the next steps. Now, why APIs are helpful? They provide speed for developers. Speed in the sense, like you want to quickly build an application, you don't want to do something on your own. There is somebody who has already solved this problem. So you can just use those APIs, like for an example of maps, how other services like Ola, Uber are able to use the maps quickly into their application. However, like we see Ola now coming up with their own maps, but then it took some fair amount of time. It takes a lot of infrastructure to build those services. So instead of that, you use APIs exposed by other service providers. Then speed, even in the development workflow, sometimes, let's say, even if you have all the resources to build your own APIs, but the development time is what you want to cut down on. These days, it's a tradition that you have one backend team and one front-end team. Backend team does the implementation part of your APIs, and there is a front-end team which keeps on working on building the client side, or the what we were calling the user interface side of things. So they both can work in parallel. So then abstraction from the internal details. Sometimes the front-end people who are working, or front-end developer team, they don't need to know like how particular thing is being done at the back end. Okay, so it abstracts some amount of detail from that. And there is another benefit of the controlled exposure. Let's say you are in a team which manages a database of let's say, employees in the company. And there is another team which builds some application, and it wants to know that who their current manager are for each employees. Okay. Now there are two ways, like either this particular team which manages all the employee data gives them access to the database entirely, or they can otherwise build an API and expose only the amount of information that the other team wants to consume. Another benefit for API is enable new and native experiences. Like you might have seen, all the smartwatches are now able to kind of provide weather information in your wristwatches. Now, weather information is some other way coming from your smartphone, and your watch doesn't necessarily have an internet connectivity directly. So either it can use the APIs indirectly through the Bluetooth in your smartphone, or it can directly connect to the internet and fetch this type of information. So these are some new and native experiences that can be provided through the APIs. Another thing is monetization. So once, let's say, you have built something which is cool, and then you want to expose it, then that could be another business area for you to kind of monetize and make money out of it. For example, like ChatGPT and all the AI tools, they built the AI system, and then now they are exposing them through APIs as well, so that you can leverage it in your own applications. Is it all good so far? Like all audio video things are working fine? Okay. Now let's talk about some of the businesses that have written the success stories with the APIs. One of the cool startups, no longer a startup now, but a full-fledged company, is Razorpay, which started from the Jaipur itself. And it revolutionized the internet payments by providing better developer experience of integrating the payment services. Before that, I remember there were things like CC Avenue and all that, pretty cumbersome process for developers to even get started and accept payments. But what this particular company did is they kind of built APIs which were very easy to use by the other developers, and they were able to quickly build their own applications using these. And that became a key point for them to become a successful business, what they are today. Then Postman, we might have used Postman or known about it. It built its own business around the entire API ecosystem, where they first started with providing a client that used to make HTTP calls easily for testing and all that. And then they started building other things around the same API ecosystem. Another startup from India was Apigee, which is now a part of Google. And I happen to work at one of the teams that used to support Apigee developers. And API Gateway in itself is a platform which kind of brings in multiple different APIs. And it's like what we said, like REST architecture is a layered system, and API gateways find their value by utilizing this feature of layered system. So they come in between and they provide some extra functionality, and clients are still able to consume the APIs in the way they would have otherwise. And yes, I expect that some of you tomorrow are going to perform some of the other startup, and then probably you would be writing your own APIs. Now, roles and industry demands around the APIs, what industry needs. It's not just the technical implementation part, what I told about the specifications. The specifications also start by defining the product requirements. So product developers, product owners, they have a big role in like starting with the specifications also. Deployments and scale. All the businesses want their APIs to scale and go at the planet scale, like how UPI works now. It's a very, very big scale, almost billions of transactions that happen on a monthly basis. And so you need a very big infrastructure for APIs to be successful and keep that infrastructure running. And how you should deploy, there are different kind of architectures and distributed systems to deploy and take care of your APIs. Then the part of monetization, like can you come up with some sort of plans how to monetize? Like right now UPI is free, but then for the system to keep up and running, there has to be some amount of fee or like a licensing fee, which people might be paying to become a UPI service provider or something. So you can have the monetization at the licensing levels, or you can have monetization at like each request levels as well. Like let's say the ChatGPT and other sort of Gen AIs APIs are now kind of monetized. They will have some defined plan. You can make 100 calls per minute or something of that sort, and based on that you will be billed. Then there is a support system where you not only just troubleshoot, but you also provide guidance to the people who are actually building on top of your APIs. The security is another big stream where people are experts for API itself, or are building tools that again fits into that layered system architecture and provides security for the APIs. Sales and productization is again like once you have the product and everything in place, then you need people who can actually create products out of these APIs. Like, for example, fraud detection is a product offered by some companies, and how they productize uh, that particular thing of fraud detection is through the sales of their APIs. Like some people can integrate this APIs in their e-commerce platforms, and then it can help detect whether this is this COD order is going to be a fraud or not. And this is one way of productizing and building new products through the APIs itself. Then industry also needs people who can evangelize, who can do POCs, who can build small tools and show that what is possible with the use of APIs of whatever that particular company is offering. Okay. Now we are done with this brief session, and I am open for the questions. Thank you for your time. Sure. I think we can take that as one of the feedback on explaining in Hindi. We can do some sessions which explains in Hindi.
I open forum for question answer session, and it is expected from our learners. Please ask only relevant question. You can also use the chat box for asking question. Ronit Kumar is asking, sir, how can we connect with you?
Yeah, I'll provide my email ID so that you can send out if you have any questions directly, and then we can see how we can take it further. There was one question about how REST is stateless if it says state transfer. Okay. Yeah, fairly like reasonable question on what does it mean by stateless and what does state transfer has to do over here. So state transfer is like you're transferring the state from the client to the server every time. So let's say you have a net banking service. You log into your mobile application and you want to check your balances and perform operations. Okay. Now the server needs to know who's connected to me, and they kind of sometimes maintain a state or a database where they say, okay, this client is now authorized and can perform some operations. Okay. But in RESTful architecture, this is what does not happen. What it says is like you present a valid token all the time to me, and that is how I can determine what is your state, like you're authenticated or not authenticated. You are authorized to perform this information or not authorized to perform this information. And then based on that, server is going to take the next steps. So that is one way of saying that, okay, this is stateless, and every time it is transferring state from client to server while making a call.
So Vipin is asking, how is AI impacting web development?
Okay, good question. AI is impacting asterisk in the time. Okay, so asterisk means like almost everything, not just the web development. But what I must say that you would see some sort of newer experiences in the web development all the time. Like how the revolution came when the jQuery and AngularJS was first introduced. We never knew the concept of um, single page applications and richer interfaces. Okay, then the applications and internet era went on to kind of releasing things like social media platforms, Orkut, Facebook, and whatnot. Like few of them are dead now, but there was like a different range of products that came in. Now there is more dynamic nature involved when the AI is coming into the picture. The user interfaces could be completely generated on fly. Okay, like let's say you just ask for give me the list of users, and now you might not have written the code actually for displaying the users in this particular format, but if let's say AI is involved over here, it can actually determine what's the best way to kind of render these on screen. So maybe let's say the front end completely is generated by AI, and you once you send the data back from the backend, the UI has some modules which can determine how well to generate these. And another thing is like, let's say I have a blog, and then I want to kind of render some information uh, directly, like I want to render images directly on this post, um, besides the content or the post with what it is talking about. And that could be every time a new image, as in when you hit the blog, and it could be generated by an AI. So those type of newer experiences you might start seeing when the AI is heavily being used in the web development.
So can you please differentiate between private and public API?
Yeah, so that is as the name suggests. As the name suggests, it is very simple. Private API means like it's not open to the world. It's probably not deployed on the internet. It's probably on your intranet. Let's say your college comes up with some sort of a result publishing or communication system through mobile applications, but you are only able to access it when you are connected to the college Wi-Fi. Then those are like internal APIs. And once, let's say, you expose them through public internet, then they probably become the public APIs. Public API doesn't mean that they are free. But some public APIs can also be monetized, and you'll have to pay something for it.
So one more question. Jigyasa is asking how Java.NET HTTP is API and not a module.
How Java.NET HTTP is API, not a module. Okay, yeah, that is a good question about what is a module and what is an API. As I said, like module contains the implementation of these APIs, and APIs are like contracts. Like let's say java.net.http is a complete module that provides the implementation for a HTTP client. Okay, and there is an API to use this HTTP client. There is like a way you create a new client. How does API work in the context of web development? Okay, we'll take that up. Let me just finish with this module and API question about Java. So we spoke about two parts, specifications and implementation. Java.http.net module provides the implementation of the API provided by these modules. That is the right way of saying it.
So
Yeah,
can you
next.
answer Shubham Sinha's question? How does API work in the context of web development?
Yeah, this is a very broad question. Web is everything all about APIs. So there is hardly anything on the web working without APIs. You kind of build a UI, let's say, which is written in JavaScript, HTML, and CSS, and then you will actually want to fetch some data from the server, right? And that is where the web APIs come in picture. You make a RESTful call to the server, and then it fetches the data and renders onto the screen. Like there is API involved in each and everything in the web. There is nothing on the web that is not working along with the APIs.
Varsha Gupta's question is, what are the HTTP methods?
So HTTP methods are actually one way of telling what is your intention. Okay, intention with this request. Like we were talking about the postcard, and there are like different type of postcards or like different colors of postcard which signify like what this is for. So they are just a plain text, if you ask me. But we all have agreed that, okay, when somebody says I'm using get method, then I will actually just request data. When when I will say post method, then I'm going to create a new record. So they are like conventions that we are actually going to just follow. In the RESTful architecture, you don't kind of explicitly tell your intent. Okay, like when I say users/users, then the HTTP get method is used, and get itself tells the intent is to fetch the list of users. Those are the HTTP methods which are on their primary use case. You can read about the complete list of HTTP methods.
So can you also please tell us some effective resources for learning about APIs for beginners?
Um, yeah, if you search on YouTube, there will be a lot of content about APIs, but in particular, there were like 4-minute developers video, 4-minute API videos by the Apigee team itself. So they are like kind of good digestible content which people can actually start seeing. And then the best way to learn is to try and build something of your own. Okay, and uh, even if it's a very, very small Hello World API, try and build and deploy it on your own. You can leverage the tools like Gemini and ChatGPT to build and deploy them. That would teach you much more than actually watching a course.
So thank you very much, sir, for sharing your vital knowledge on the world of API. Now I request Dr. Arvind Kumar Singh, Director of CDOE VGOE Department, for giving vote of thanks for our guest.
Yeah, thank you, Khyati ma'am. Vikramji, thank you very much from the behalf of Center for Distance and Online Education, Vivekananda Global University. We are grateful towards you that you make out your time, you share your word of wisdom with our learners. Though API is something which is very relevant and important for everybody, whether we are a technocrats or whether we are dealing with the business world. That's why we intended to organize this session for all the learners, specifically not for the technical students like students of BCA or MCA. Everybody must know about the API since this is the era of AI. So we non-technical people can also create the API. As you have already mentioned that there are a lot many tools like ChatGPT, Gemini, and other tools also where we can utilize it. We've learned the power of API once the UPI transactions came into the picture. As a non-technical person, I can say I came to the concept because of the UPI only. Now, API is something which is become an integral part of our life, and we must utilize the technology. The way you have explained the concept, I must congratulate you because you have taken care of both kind of audience, whether people are from the technical background and laymen like us. And the way you have shown them the real example, they were also very much fruitful. And we are very much thankful to you that you make out your time. And I'm also thankful to all the staff member of CDOE as well as the learning community who were patiently listening to you. They were making the notes and most of them are eager to learn more about the API. The best takeout of the session was the last statement you made that instead of listening to so much videos, consuming a lot of knowledge, they must try to build a API, a smaller API with the help of say ChatGPT or Gemini that will deeper their understanding. Will love to invite you again to have more session about the topic, and I'll request my LMS manager just to showcase our gratitude, present our token of respect to you, e-certificate of appreciation to you from the CDOE department as well as from the management of VGU. Vikramji, we are very much thankful to you and hope to see you again. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the opportunity. I also loved providing this information, although this session was kept very light to kind of provide insights to both type of audiences, where some people who are not into the computer science, but still they understand the concept and how the world is being powered by APIs.
In future, we'll have more sessions where we'll try to invite only the people who are relevant for this particular thing. Now everybody have a basic understanding. We'll have more advanced session in future. Thank you.
Yeah.
Every student is requested to fill the feedback form so that they can get the certificate as well as they can raise their queries also. We have also mentioned a point of query there, and we'll share those points with Vikramji so that whenever he is having time, he'll revert back you on your query.